Forgotten Memories is a third-person survival horror game developed and published by Psychos Interactive, and was first released for iOS devices in April of 2015. The Definitive Edition, released in April of 2018, added over 300 various changes and improvements to the game, and later came to Android devices in October of 2019. The Android version of the game is what I'm going to be playing here. In Forgotten Memories, players take on the role of Rose Hawkins, an inspector who's been working the case of a missing girl named Eden. As her investigation leads her towards the abandoned New Vineyard Asylum, she suddenly wakes up in a room inside the asylum itself, injured, with no memory of the past several hours. As Rose ventures deeper into the facility, she begins to slowly unravel the mysteries of strange, unethical experiments in the realm of parapsychology taking place, and the grisly murders committed to cover up the failures of these top-secret projects. The story is told through a mix of audio logs, files, journal entries, the environment itself, and the occasional pre-rendered cutscene here and there. At the title screen, all three difficulty modes are available from the start. On higher difficulties, health and save items are more scarce. Rose takes a bit more damage from enemy attacks, while enemies take less damage from hers, and her flashlight's battery drains faster. On easy, saving is unlimited and the flashlight's battery never drains. Like many other mobile games, Forgotten Memories uses a virtual gamepad for movement and camera control, set to the left and right sides of the screen. By default, the gamepad is invisible, and while there is a setting in the options menu to display it on screen in the form of a white dot, I feel it works better when it can't be seen. Less clutter on the screen that way. The designated areas are sectioned off well enough so that you'll never find yourself moving the camera when you meant to move your character by accident or vice versa. When you come across anything in the environment that you can interact with, an exclamation point shows up in the bottom center of the screen. Tapping anywhere on the screen examines the item. The only downside to this is that sometimes when I start to drag my finger to walk away from whatever it is I was just looking at, the game still registers this as a tap and examines the item a second time. I'm willing to admit that this is often more my fault than the game's, but it's a little bit annoying when that happens. As Rose finds various files and journals and notices certain details in the environment, she will make a note of them in response, indicated by a flashing notepad icon near the top left corner of the screen. Above this is a folder icon which houses the game's pause menu. Tapping this icon lets you see your notes, change game options, and quit the game. Tapping the flashlight icon in the top center of the screen does exactly what you probably think it does. In a dark area, you can still open doors nearby, but you can't examine other items in the environment unless there's a light source. The flashlight's battery power is limited. As you keep it on, the white bar filling in the icon slowly drains over time, and you'll eventually need to interact with these strangely convenient electrical stations to recharge it. These stations can be used as many times as you like. Even on hard mode, where there are fewer recharge stations around, and the battery drains even faster than usual, I never found myself in a tight spot because I was low on energy. In fact, even at my slowest, most casual pace while playing the game, the battery never went lower than maybe 2/3 of the way down between stops at recharge stations. Personally, I think I'd find the game more engaging if the flashlight drained even faster and recharge stations had limited uses instead, making them a more valuable resource. I just think that a more serious threat of being stuck in the dark would be more likely to keep players on their toes. Tapping the toolbox icon in the top right accesses your inventory of weapons, consumables, and key items. When this menu is open, time slows down to a crawl so you can tap to switch weapons and use items in the middle of combat. When you have a weapon equipped, tapping the crosshair icon on the right switches you to a combat mode. Then, tapping anywhere in the general right half of the screen lets you attack. Firearms work the same way. With melee weapons, you have a 3-hit combo, where timing your presses deals the maximum amount of damage and helps keep some distance between you and the enemy. With a firearm equipped, tapping the ammo counter next to the weapon icon reloads your gun, and you can freely reload outside of combat mode as well. I find this to be one of the better takes on shooting mechanics that I've seen in a mobile game, from my experience. Toggling between a normal and combative stance, and simply tapping the screen to fire a gun offers way more immediate control than auto-fire or having to aim and then tap a separate button to fire. In the options menu, underneath some basic visual and control setups, is a list of sliders and checkboxes that adjust the game's graphical quality to suit your needs. The default settings made the game a bit hard to look at, so I figured I'd make some adjustments. My current smartphone is an LG X Power, which is about as powerful as an egg timer, so I definitely had to experiment with the various settings to find a more or less ideal graphical setup for my device. Maxing out all the settings turned my game into a high-def PowerPoint presentation that was so borderline unplayable that I couldn't even get any decent footage of it, and turning everything all the way down made it look like a bad port of a PSP game. The healthy balance I found was changing the resolution to 75%, the frame rate to 30, turning on the multi-sample anti-aliasing, and then everything else off. These settings are what I'm using for the footage in this review. Sure, the frame rate still dips from time to time, and I won't be able to enjoy the dynamic shadow effects among other things, but given what I'm working with, I think it's a fair compromise. I take what I can get. And to the game's credit, even on these relatively low settings, it's still quite nice to look at for a mobile game. The environments are well modeled and densely packed with a lot of small, low poly details. The lighting effects, including the flashlight, still shine through despite the lack of cast shadows. Throughout the game, you'll find computers sitting on desks. Often there will be floppy disks sitting next to them. Like ink ribbons in Resident Evil, these floppy disks are used to save the game by selecting them from your inventory while standing in front of the computer when the interaction prompt shows up. You can only have one save file for the entire game, and there are 0 checkpoints or continues. If you die, the game is over, so you'll either have to reload a save or start all over. As the game first boots up, a message displays, suggesting the use of headphones, and rightfully so. The audio design here is pretty solid. The echoes from Rose's footsteps, constant buzzing of fluorescent lights, water dripping from broken pipes, wind howling from the snowstorm outside. All of this is backed by an original score that appropriately sets an eerie, ominous tone and immediately picks up when the action starts. The music and sound effects are well balanced as it is, but I would have preferred to have the option to adjust the volume just so I could enjoy the ambient sounds on their own. The voice acting is probably the lowest point here, I'd say. It's passable for the most part, and maybe the somewhat hammy nature of it was intentional, but some lines just sound strange and make the characters sound like they're not taking their situation seriously. Excluding a boss fight, there are 3 main enemy types you'll encounter throughout the game: mannequins, shadows, and possessed dolls. Mannequins are the most common enemy. Previously used by patients at the asylum as targets for telekinesis experiments, they can be found all over the place, lying on the floor, casually sitting and standing around as if they were actual residents and staff going about their business, and sometimes they're even posed in a way to further convey parts of the story. What makes them so effective is that you never quite know if or when they'll attack. Sometimes their placement is a bit more obvious, like blocking your path after picking up an item. One situation has them standing on both sides of a doorway, and I might attempt to fake them out, assuming that I would trigger them, only to realize that I'm just wasting my time. I wouldn't say the encounters are random, there is only so many encounters that are possible altogether, but I'd like to think that I've seen enough variations to know that there is plenty of opportunities to be attacked by mannequins that you assume wouldn't attack. The possessed dolls are only featured in a single area, sitting on chairs and lying on the floor of an office. Picking up the revolver or the key item from the suitcase on the table causes them to wake up and slowly walk towards you with knives in hand. Because of their small size, it can be tough to hit them at times, even if you're firing point blank with a shotgun. Sometimes they'll even play dead after you shoot them and get back up later on, but another handful of shots to put them down for good. Shadows are the most aggressive and most powerful enemy in the game. They can take more hits than others, and if they get too close, they have a grab attack that can not only do some sizable damage, even after you mash through a QuickTime event to push them off, but it can also take priority over your own attacks, even if you hit them mid-grab. One of the earliest possible encounters with a shadow is forcibly hostile, but later on the game introduces a stealth mechanic to get around them. You will know early on if there's one in the room with you, as you can always hear them singing or crying in the distance. By turning off your flashlight and walking instead of running, you can safely sneak by them without engaging in combat. The smaller childlike shadows even give you a second chance and back off if you happen to accidentally scare them with your flashlight. When an enemy takes you by surprise, Rose often gets a little startled and stands in place for about a half second. This wouldn't be a problem if it didn't also happen in situations where the enemy is placed right next to you. That moment where you're stuck in place almost always gives them a cheap free hit on you. Alongside exploration and combat are a few puzzle sections, but they're pretty simple. The solutions can be easily memorized to the point where I could just punch in the necessary codes or activate the right series of switches and levers right off the bat, as if they were muscle memory. Apart from that, it's the classic find the thing and put it in the thing type of situation. Once I finished the game, I was a bit surprised to find out just how short it was, clocking in at just under 2 hours on my first playthrough, and that included me taking the time to explore, examine parts of the environment, and read most of the notes and files that I found. I made an effort to hold on to all the ammunition, health items, and floppy disks that I possibly could because I was expecting a lengthier campaign ahead of me, but I didn't end up using as much of that as I thought I would. The final result screen gives you ratings based on your chosen difficulty, item consumption, number of saves, and total playtime, up to a maximum 10-star rating. If anything, based on this, it almost seems like the game encourages speedy, efficient runs, but that wasn't the impression I was getting as I played through it. Beating the game unlocks New Game Plus for all difficulties. There are no collectibles, stats, or upgrades, so there's nothing to carry over from the regular modes. So New Game Plus offers bonus content in the form of added weapons like a pump-action shotgun and a semi-auto pistol, and also extra costumes for Rose to wear. So, not quite satisfied with a 3 out of 10, I decided to start a New Game Plus run on hard difficulty, keeping in mind where all the key items are, mentally mapping out an efficient route, and avoiding as many enemies as I could whenever possible. I finished in about half an hour with a 9 out of 10 rating, losing 1 star as a result of using 2 health kits, which struck me as odd because I was pretty sure I had only used 1 throughout the entire run, but I had an idea as to why this was not the case, so let's hold that thought for a second. So, I started another New Game Plus run, this time on normal difficulty, and finished in about 20 minutes with another 9 out of 10 rating, this time because playing on normal only rewards you 1 star, and this time I did get the 2 stars for using 1 health kit, even though I didn't use any at all. So here's the thing, the game actually counts the very first health item introduced in a tutorial towards your total usage shown on the end result screen. This one specific first aid kit is mandatory, it has to be used or else you won't get past the opening area. So what the game is really saying is that you can't use a single first aid kit outside of the tutorial if you want to get the full 2 stars towards your total rating. Not to say that I'm not up for the challenge, but it would have helped if they communicated this a little bit better, more clearly maybe. It's all good though. I went back in again and finished the game in under 19 minutes with a perfect rating. Now, getting 10 stars doesn't seem to yield any in-game rewards, but it's a nice little personal reward for essentially speedrunning a mobile game. As I was going back to the game to get higher ratings, I noticed some minor changes when I took a different path. I would imagine that most people would encounter their first enemy, a hostile mannequin, in the first floor men's bathroom after you pick up a key item from a coat hanging in a stall. In one of my later runs, I bypassed the restroom altogether and I went up to the 3rd floor instead, where my first encounter was with a mannequin posing in front of a coffee machine. The game even had a unique pre-rendered cutscene for that one too, the point at which the game takes you into the nowhere zone to introduce the stealth mechanic changes too. It can either be after leaving the men's restroom or leaving the 3rd floor intervention room. At the time of writing this review, an update to the game was added on December 16th. This update included some slightly updated visuals, a festive holiday theme that decorates the environment and gives everyone Santa hats, further killing my frame rate, and even controller support for any Android-compatible gamepad. On my previous phone, I would sometimes use a DualShock 3 controller along with a USB-C to USB adapter and a special app to play games like Dead Trigger 2. Up until now, I've never tried it with my current phone. To start off, I was pleasantly surprised that my controller worked from the get-go, with no need for any third-party app to enable it. On top of that, all the game's controls were very responsive and already mapped to the appropriate buttons, moving and looking around with the analog sticks, aiming and shooting with the triggers, even replacing the need for the walk-run toggle by holding down L1 or R1 to run. With the exception of one puzzle that still required me to tap the screen in order to solve it, I was still able to perform all the other actions perfectly. Apologies in advance for going on a bit of a tangent here, but while I do like the idea of playing mobile games with a controller, I prefer to avoid it whenever possible. I genuinely enjoy mobile games that try to take full advantage of touch and swipe controls, but are still comfortable to play, even if they try to go for something a bit more complex like a shooter, a 3D platformer, or in this case survival horror. Having the option for a controller is nice, but I also can't help but feel that if you add a controller into the mix, that kind of disregards all the time and effort put into these gameplay mechanics that were designed around a unique control scheme that the developers felt was best suited to a touchscreen. That's just my 2 cents. Alright, tangent over. I just happened to pick up Forgotten Memories for free back in December while casually scrolling through the list of games on sale in the Google Play Store. I didn't think I'd end up enjoying it much at first, but once I took a moment to just sit down and get into it, the story and the atmosphere really drew me in and I just couldn't stop playing. The developers at Psychos Interactive did a really good job at invoking the look and feel of classic horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. It has the heart of a console title while still playing to the strengths of a mobile platform. This is exactly the kind of quality I look for in premium mobile games. My one biggest complaint with the game is that it's so short, and I only say that because I was enjoying it so much and I really wanted to see more of it. But in spite of that, I can see that this is a very solid foundation for what could easily be a much bigger game someday, with maybe some more enemy variety and a bit more depth added to the combat, puzzles, and the writing. I won't talk spoilers, but the ending definitely leaves room for a potential sequel, and I would absolutely look forward to it if it ever happens.